Hey, we're live.
Yay!
Yay. Hi, everyone. Here we go. Welcome to our UDL live stream here at San Joaquin County Office of Education. This is so much fun.
It is.
I have
It's
my
like
friend Lisa here. This
we're
is just going to be great
it's
today.
like that song like reunited and it feels so good.
Right, right. Well, some of you may recognize the two of us together because we've done a lot of UDL trainings over the years,
Yeah.
a lot of virtual trainings, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
I miss my UDL partner
I
so
know. It was like
much.
the Fred and Lisa
It
show,
was like the
right?
Fred and Lisa show. It was so much fun. So, you probably know I'm Fred Cochran, and this is
Lisa Bowman.
yes, and you know I'm a coordinator here at in Ed Services for continuous improvement and support. But Lisa is
Oh, so I want to say that I had the opportunity to work with Fred for 3 great years as a coordinator for continuous improvement and support. And much of what we did together and his mentorship led me to a new position as the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Access for San Joaquin County Office of Education. So I'm just down the way, and I
mm,
miss Fred dearly, but I don't ever forget the things that we worked on together and
yeah.
your influence on
Ah, thank you. But you know what? That inspiration goes both ways
me.
because the work is you can't do this work by yourself.
Yes.
And it really makes a big difference when you have friends and colleagues that you can know and understand what universal design for learning can mean and what a how it's going to create such a major shift
Yeah.
in our learning for our
It's a
kids,
game
right?
changer,
It
right?
is a game
Yeah.
changer. It really is. Um, so we are, as you know, live today, and this session will be posted later and it'll be recorded. If you're watching this as a recording, please comment, offer us any suggestions, because we don't know what it's like to be on the other side of the screen sometimes, right? We we
Yeah.
could we could see ourselves right now and say, hey, we look pretty good,
Yeah.
but
And you
again,
and I could just chit chat all day long
we
and,
could,
and it
you
might
know,
just be terrible.
because it's kind of what we do. So this is kind of like a virtual podcast, if you want to look at it that way. So we're here in my office, and we're ready to talk about universal design for learning. But before we start that conversation, I wanted to just point out that in the our feed in Facebook, you'll find a number of resources about UDL and equity. We want to be sure that that because we won't be able to reference every single thing that comes up because it's a never-ending discussion, right?
Right.
So, but there are resources to engage you in this conversation because sometimes you just need a place to start the conversation, right? Also, the UDL module on equity is uploaded now in the Padlet, and all of that is posted. And the recorded version's there, so really we're ready to have the talk.
Yeah. Oh, and don't forget about your awesome live binder.
Oh, my light
that is
binder,
that
yeah.
is being used nationwide, and I can't explain to you how many people come up to me and they're like, oh, I have this resource, and I was like, oh my
Oh,
gosh, that is
please.
my colleague Fred Cochran. That is his live binder, I swear, Fred. So and people have shared it to me. They're like, oh, you're about UDL, have you seen this? And I was like, listen, I know the creator of that. So
That's pretty
that
bad.
live binder is literally, it has so many things in it. So
I'm getting close to, I think, 49,000 hits on the binder.
see, I told you, it
I
is like
know. A
nationwide.
lot
I'm
of
not
people
even
look at it.
kidding.
I know,
Yeah.
and I try to keep it up to date, and also always welcome any new resources. I have some new resources that I haven't even put in there yet, so
Oh, okay. Well,
I still have to add things.
I'm not.
But
I have to be honest. I'm not up on all the new stuff because there's so much new stuff, and there's so much stuff out there that so many people are innovating and creating. That's good, right? They are like
yeah.
really taking off with this. So yeah, share it.
They are, where the UDL is really a fast and it's moving in a positive direction in the state. There's a lot of ways to get involved with universal design for learning. So we're been working on this for a while, and we're glad that it's kind of coming together now.
Yeah.
So about, well, I think it was pre-COVID time. I think it was, maybe it was in December, before, around that time when COVID started the outbreak. You and I were at a trainers in
Yeah.
Sacramento, and one of our presenters was Nicole Tucker Smith.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, what a treat that was.
Yes. She was
And
amazing.
uh,
So inspirational.
so inspirational. We use her materials when we talk about equity. She is leading, one of the leaders of the revision of the guidelines, which I found out will be probably introduced in 2024 for the 40th anniversary of CAST.
Wow.
CAST is going to be 40 years old. And so
Younger
I
than
got
me.
that update.
Younger than me.
I'm not there yet, but it's all right. but anyway, yeah, that's a joke. But anyway, but they have just thousands of people that have offered interest in providing input and of revising the guidelines. We have had discussions before, and Lisa and I have done presentations on UDL and equity where we kind of have to do a bit of a scavenger hunt. I kind of have to kind of dive deep into the guidelines to find where we could maybe call out equity. We did that with social emotional learning. Doing it with equity is a little more challenging, but you can find it if you have the time and can invest the effort into doing so.
Well, and I think that the guidelines really were based in equity. I think it's really important though when you're doing equity work to actually call it out and having it spelled out. And so I'm hoping that's what CAS is then doing, is really making it explicit into how this attends to equity, so that maybe we don't have to do the scavenger hunt, right? So that
Yeah.
it's so much, it's just right there.
Well, it's like amplifying voice. If it doesn't speak to you, it's going to be hard to really define it, right?
And in equity work, we're always talking about voice, but maybe, saying like to provide equity, you want to amplify voice, right?
Right,
So,
right.
it's not that it wasn't equity,
Uh-huh.
it is that they just want to specifically call it out, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So, as we talk more about equity, and I think probably one of the graphics that really stands out to me is looking at equality and equity.
The difference,
Yeah,
right?
the difference. Thinking that equal means, well, it's fair share. You got the same thing, so how does that really transfer to equity,
Yeah.
right?
Right, and we recognize that just because everything equal does not make it equity. And I love how there was one graphic that you brought to me, which was the bicycles.
Mm-hmm.
And I really related to that because I was like, well, if you give me a bicycle, that's great. But I'm like 5'1", and I can never reach the pedals. So while I have a bicycle, I can't ride it. And so that might be a quality. Everyone got a bicycle, but equity would be providing something that I could actually use, not just that one size fits all, right?
Right,
'Cause it
right.
doesn't.
Yeah. I love the graphics where they're showing the kids at the fence trying to watch the ball game. And what I really, really like is how they finally remove the fence, but then the kids are able to be part of the game.
Yes.
It isn't just being able to see it, it's being able to be part of it, right? Isn't that just to me is like, regardless, everyone should have opportunity,
Yeah.
right?
And I'm going to push you here.
Yes, do it.
Okay. Because in the graphic that I saw, they all had the same uniform on. And I thought, shouldn't they be able to wear whatever they want?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because they all have purple shirts on.
Yeah.
Wasn't the purples?
They all changed to the same uniform. I was like, well, if we're talking about respecting everyone's voice and who they are, then do they all have to wear the same uniform?
Yeah.
Or do they all just get to express themselves how they.
That's a good point. Also, another way I think about it is, and probably it's because this is what my background on like team sports and things are, is that we wear a color, a uniform to signify being on a team,
Yeah.
and but if you look at a local ball game in a neighborhood, who
Yeah.
wears a uniform for that?
No.
But everyone should be able to participate,
Yeah.
right? Everyone should be able to. So it shouldn't matter. But that's a good point.
Well,
I'm
I'm
glad
not
you.
trying to throw you for a loop.
You're
I just
not
was,
throwing me.
it's just
That's right.
thoughts, you know. It's
No,
just
yeah,
like
that's
when we
good.
think, it's always the evolution of it, right?
Right.
It's a journey.
Yeah.
And so just thinking through that, like, yeah, maybe everybody needs a uniform. They all need clothes, but
Yeah.
can they wear something like that's a different color because that
Sure.
represents them more? Or what if I want to wear, a skirt
Yeah.
instead of pants?
Exactly.
Can I do that? Is that okay?
So when we think about the principle of engagement, we're going to touch upon the three principles today, and we won't go through all 9 guidelines and the checkpoints today, but you do have reference to this in the live stream, or the stream, I should say, or what do you call it? A feed.
Oh, the feed.
You
Yeah,
call it the
it's a
feed.
feed.
Yes, I'm learning now. So anyway, so if we look at having an anti-bias mindset in the principle of engagement, how we recruit interest with equity considerations, what are some things we should keep in mind? What are some things that come to mind? And this is by no means an exhaustive list of things. There are a number of things to be considering, but just kind of in general, what's your take on that?
Well, so one of the things that I always think that we need to do is we need to start with an agreed upon definition of equity. Because sometimes when you say what is equity, people have different understandings of what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are lots of definitions of equity out there. So I think it's really important that you, in whatever space you're working in, or if you're on a team or you're in a school or a district, that you agree upon one, right? And they're all kind of similar. The one that I really like is from a book that was put out, I think, last year. It's called Street Data by Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan. And their definition of equity is an approach to ensuring equally high outcomes for all by removing the predictability of success or failure that currently correlates with any racial, social, economic, or cultural factor. And I really love that because when I think about this, I think about that word predictability. It really speaks to me because unfortunately we do have data, and we've had data for years about outcomes in our schools, predictable outcomes of who succeeds and who fails. And it really just brings that back to us, right? It's like, let's go back to the data and let's look at, if we looked at some of these students, could we say, oh, I could probably predict what is going to happen for them, right? Based on these factors. Yeah. And if we can, and we're seeing traditionally over time our data kind of playing out that way, then we need to make some changes, right?
Right.
So I love that definition. I use it all of the time. It's not mine. Shane Saphir, Jamila Dugan, they have a great book. It's called Street Data. And it's just a way to look at things in a different way, really taking that data and saying, how does this apply to our kids in our situation?
I really like that a lot, because a lot of us have experienced different stereotypes, and how we do make those predictions based on things we know nothing about, where they're baseless because we haven't really addressed the issue yet. We haven't come to really understand the data and what we could do to remove these predictions. It's really a lot about mindset, isn't it?
It is, and it's about understanding. And to go back to your question, Fred, I'm sorry I didn't script your
love
question. I like to only take you off track. Like, we could talk about all kinds of stuff.
We do.
Eventually, we're going to be talking about, like, I don't know, something like
electric cars.
Where we want to go for vacation or something. So when we're talking about engagement with an anti-bias mindset, I think first of all, really we have to think of what does anti-bias mean also, right? And it means, you know, really working towards removing all of those biases that we come with inherently, based on who we are, our lived experiences, just being in America, right? We are inundated with all of this culture, right, that we get, and all these messages. So, what are the biases that we have? And so, to do this work, I mean, I think it starts with us first. And I always say in this work that, um, you know, it starts with me, but it's not about me.
Oh, that's so true.
And that's hard, right? It's a hard mindset. But I really have to dig deep within me to figure out what I'm thinking and feeling, so that I can really provide really great instruction or spaces for my students or for whoever I'm dealing with, right? And so that starts with me looking within and doing that work on myself first.
You know, I totally get that. I've gone through that experience myself, probably about 4 years ago, and really, by kind of identifying my own, you know, biases that we have, and understanding that some of them are just built into to us. You know, they're kind of our what we have already kind of been conditioned to in some ways. But it really does start with a journey, because when I started doing trainings about unconscious bias, and how to approach identity, and how empathy drives the conversation, and the impact. I couldn't talk to this stuff at all, but I had to go through it. It was a little bit emotional. Well, it was very emotional, actually. It
Yeah.
wasn't a little emotional, because, and I, even at my age, I really feel, oh, I'm so glad I've experienced this. I don't know if everybody gets a chance to do that, but really it is, it's it just changes your life, I think, because when you can look at each other and just know that you're here together and you're connected as humans, right?
Yeah.
Not as colors or anything. You know, it's just the fact that we can coexist, and we can um, be you know, coexisting.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
one of the things that I do, when we're talking about engagement and we want to talk about an anti bias mindset, Fred, I think you have in, recruiting interest with equity considerations, cultivating a welcoming environment. And I think one of the things that, we to do that is to really, like we said, first start with ourselves, right? But then also really consider the lived experiences of our students, and whose lens are we looking through that? Looking at that through? Are we looking at through my experience and I'm judging that?
Right.
Or am I really trying to connect with my students and what they live in and what their circumstances are? Um, and really kind of taking yourself out of that equation when you're creating a welcoming environment. What's going to be welcoming for them? And so I know we often try to look at things like, oh, everyone likes this or everyone likes that, but that's not true, right? That's equality and it's not equity. So really doing some research and some investigation into the community that you're in and the students that you're serving, and deep research. So, figuring out like where do they come from, what are their backgrounds, what are their cultural backgrounds, what are their norms. You know, maybe they have religious preferences, maybe they have, maybe you have a certain amount of African American students, maybe you have a certain amount of Latinx students, maybe you have a certain amount of students that are AAPI, or, you know, Asian American Pacific Islander.
Thank you for
Okay.
that.
Or you might have, you know, we have a large diverse population here. And so just expecting that coming to school and having my classroom set up in a certain way is going to be welcoming is not really looking at it through a lens of my students, because school is not always looked at in the same way through every culture.
Right. You know, when after I think my 5th year of teaching, I found an opportunity to be a teacher of English language development, and
Me too.
you too. I know that's one of our connections.
Yeah.
and I think that is when I started to understand that they can't. I don't want them to be like me. I want them to be, I need to understand what it's like to be them.
Yeah.
Some of my students have had different experiences coming into the United States. Some were refugees, some were smuggled in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trauma. There's but the where I started was with the environment, to know that it was a safe place for them to be, and that whatever they did as far as their efforts and to try to acquire language was something we'd celebrate together. And it wouldn't be, oh, you didn't say it right. It wasn't that. It was all about trying to support them and helping them assimilate into a totally different environment. And that's hard to do.
It is hard. And you know what I think is interesting is we always, it was English language learners, English language development. But what if we were to just do something like change that class and call it emergent bilingual or emergent multilingual, right? Class. I mean, here's the thing, Fred, is we took a foreign language in high school, didn't you? And I am not fluent in that language that I took, unfortunately. But we recognize it's such an asset. Right. And yet when we look at our kids, we're like, oh, you're in the English language development class, like you're at a disadvantage. When in fact, they are multilingual, and sometimes they have multiple languages, right? But then now they're doing social English and then academic English, and learning an entire coursework in a different language. So I just feel like just the language we use can be welcoming or not welcoming.
I totally get that. And I've been on calls recently where we're looking at some new modules for English language development, but we're referring to English learners as multilinguistic or
multilingual, emergent multilingual.
And really that does make so much sense. I have been, when I talk to parents of my English learners, I stressed how wonderful it is that your child has the opportunity to be bilingual or biliterate or maybe triliterate.
Yeah.
And what a gift that is. And that's something that is like, wow, bringing that to the classroom is major. It's really big, right?
And I saw there is some brain research that says that, like, if you're multilingual, you live like 5 years longer than people that are monolingual. I'm like, dang it! Like, I need to get on this so I can live longer. Right? I mean, come on, Fred.
No.
This is something we can do to live longer.
Yo hablo poquito español. Okay. My students were really good because I would practice my Spanish because I took up quite a bit of Spanish, and we would help each other because I would help them how to say it in English. Yeah. They would correct my Spanish because I was always, I couldn't conjugate the verb exactly right, or that's the wrong tense, Mr. Cochran, what are you doing? And they roll their eyes like that, but then, but again, it built community because they knew it was safe.
That's
right.
They
knew it was safe. And
well, that's you creating a welcoming environment, right? So one of those things is that you were vulnerable and let them know that you don't know. Right? And so putting them on a level of being an expert. And I think that's about equity as well. So.
Right. So making culturally relevant connections to them, I think we're talking about we're talking about this environment, creating the safe place to be, honoring them and honoring their beliefs, right? What they bring, the treasures and talents they bring, and knowing that all students come with experiences. Yeah. We don't know they're not always the same, but they all come to school with experiences.
Yeah. And gifts. And I think that's such a great point, Fred, is that, when we're really going to dig deep into culture, I think a lot of us, we start at like, oh, food or the way they dress and things. But I think it is about looking at what is acceptable and what is expected in their culture. And then how do our standards and our preferences and our expectations in class mirror those, or how do they respect those? Because, for instance, like, in an American culture, it may be more acceptable to be quiet and not question things, and to be maybe meek or to hold things in. But in other cultures, it is more acceptable and expected to be louder, to be more boisterous, to question things. And it is a challenge for us to look at when we are interacting with our students. If we have a student whose culture values questioning, values being loud, values using their hands, values standing and talking and being more vigorous, how do we interpret that? Is that, no, you need to sit down? Do we find it threatening? Do we find it like, oh, they're being disrespectful? And there are studies that talk about how different cultures don't kind of match ours. And then how does that play out in the classroom?
Right. Exactly.
And so I didn't want to get too deep there, but that is something we can really look at, is looking at deep culture. It's not just their customs and like their holidays and what they wear and that kind of thing, but it is, what is it like at their home? What is the expectation for them, and how do they behave? What do they feel is normal? And then what are you asking them to do, and how are you judging the way that they interact with you?
Yeah, because often I've heard things like, well, the parents can't support their child at home. But unless we know what the family structure is, we can't make calls like that. But as what, and I'm sure you did this too in your years as EL teachers, talking about keeping your first language right up front and present and celebrated, and oral traditions, all the things that are part of this student's life. It is just important that put value to that, and that if you can't read in English, that's okay. If you can't read, that's okay. Can you tell a story? Can you just have oral storytelling? And many of the things we do in storytelling, it translates, right? It always translates.
That's so cultural, Fred. I'm glad you brought that up. And if we're talking about, cultural considerations to recruit interest, right? I think in like a Eurocentric American kind of culture, we value reading of stories. But many cultures, they do value the oral tradition. And that is how information, stories, connections, that is how everything is passed down. And it's not because they can't write. It's not because they are not good storytellers. It's because the value of getting that information from your elders and connecting and sharing that is what they value, right? And so that is that deep culture, making those relevant connections. And so does everything have to be in writing? Like, we value the writing. I mean, I know we're like, read to your kids, and that's great. But some kids also think about this, is that what's important is that they spent time with their grandparents hearing the stories, right? And then we can also value that oral communication as well.
Yeah, so coming back to the fact that, empathy plays such a large part of all this, and knowing it's not just the student, but it's really the family structure as well that really helps us to create the relationship that's needed. We know our parents want the best for their students. That may be why they came to the United States, if we're talking about people who migrated here, and we need to know that they put a lot of trust in us. They put so much trust in us.
Their most precious gift, right? Their child. I look at my child and I'm like, when I talk to his teachers, they probably hate me, but I'm like, I'm sending you the most precious gift that I have. Please take care of him.
Right.
Right? And so it's like, oh, okay, reframe that for me, right?
Right.
I'm not just sending you another kid. This is my most precious gift.
Right.
So,
Yeah. You know, I'm just looking through this graphic, and then we have been talking about how you can sustain effort and persistence with equity in mind. We've been talking about equity. We've been talking about connectedness with humans, human connectedness, and really examining our privilege.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's really really important. That is. That is something, and that is a personal journey.
it's a personal journey, and
Yeah.
it's a tough journey,
Mhm.
and it's something that you have to work on every day. I work on it every day, Fred, and it's not going to be comfortable.
No.
There are days where you're going to be like, "Oh, I really screwed that up," and there are days where you're thinking, "Oh, I have damaged people." And I think that all of the time. I think back to, oh my gosh, I probably damaged children in some of the things that I did, right? And we think back to, I think it's Maya Angelou who says that when you know now that you know better, do better. And so, not excusing what I did, but now that I know better, I want to make sure that I'm doing better for our kids. And I think the universal design for learning is definitely something that I wish had existed or I had known about way back when I started my educational journey,
Yeah.
because I think so often we get locked into, I just teach the way that I learned,
Exactly.
right? The way I was taught. And many of us were taught where it's like, okay, sit down, be quiet, let's sit in rows. I'm going to tell you what's up here because I'm the teacher. You're an empty vessel. I'm going to pour it into you, and you're going to learn it, and then I'm going to test you on it, and then you're going to be on your merry way. Right? And I think we're having this discussion is all about changing that mindset that when you come to us, you're not an empty vessel.
Right.
You are full, and you have something to offer.
Right.
You have gifts.
Right.
And I want to honor those. And I can learn from you. I'm a teacher. I learn from kids all of the time. My son is 13, and I don't even want to tell you all the things I learned from this child. Right? And so, just honoring that we are all human beings that have something to offer.
Right. Yeah, I love that. So one thing that I'm looking at is that under self-regulation as an equity practice, one thing that just stands out to me is disrupting implicit bias.
Oof.
Because I can just speak from an experience when I wasn't a newcomer teacher, and I would get comments from some of my colleagues, and I had to kind of, I had to be their voice.
Yeah.
I had to stand up for them to say that they deserve an education,
Yeah.
and but there were some people that felt that money should be funded a certain way, and didn't really understand why I would want to do that kind of work. And I said, why wouldn't I want to do that? You know what a gift it was to you remember. It's just the best thing in the world when those light bulbs go off and kids start to make sense. They understand idiomatic phrases and metaphors. They start to understand the nuance of language. Oh my gosh, it was just such a thrill.
Yeah. Something you cannot, trade.
Right.
Trade.
Right.
You're right. So I want to talk about disrupting because, just that word, disruption, right? We're like, no, I got to keep everything, safe and calm.
Yeah, sweet.
So, I can't remember now who it is, but I recently read this poem about a brave space and inviting us into a brave space because this work is brave. It requires courage, and it requires really facing some things that are hard and doing some things that we don't really want to do, right? That can be uncomfortable. And so we often, when we are doing equity trainings and when we're doing this work, we talk about those 4 norms of courageous conversations by Glenn Singleton. And we talk about, sitting in that discomfort. It's going to be uncomfortable. And so recognizing that if we don't experience discomfort, it means we're staying in the same place. We're not changing and we're not growing. And so there's going to be some times where it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. It's going to require courage. It's going to require bravery. I'm not trying to scare you away. And you're going to mess it up. I mess it up.
We all mess it up.
We all mess it up,
We all
right?
mess it up.
But it takes the courage and the bravery and the persistence to keep going because the kids deserve it, right? And so by disrupting implicit bias, I think that one, again, it starts with you, examining your own biases. But then having language, a common language to talk with your students about and with your colleagues about no, this is, I recognize what this is and I want to talk to you about it, right? And here is how it is making me feel or how others are feeling.
Right. I think you bring forward the idea of relevance and why this is important. Removing those threats that are threatening distractions or threats in the classroom, so that you can promote this. I love that. It made me think of something, and it'll come back to me in a minute. But
well, maybe because I was talking about the language and having conversations about what is the language that we are all going to use to talk about this, because you have to help students have the language to disrupt this, right? I was recently in a training and someone was like, oh, kids keep yelling out that's racist and it's not really racist. And I said, well, here's what I want to talk about is our kids don't always have the language to talk about what is going on, but they recognize something is wrong. And if we're just saying, no, that's not racist, go away, or that, we're dismissing it, we're not attending to their recognition that they are not feeling okay.
I remember now what you made me think about, because she always makes me think of things, and I love working with Lisa, but about the power of, and what powers teachers have to be those role models or the models of how this should sound like, what it should sound like, what it should feel like, and there's so much power in that, because kids don't know what's going on in your head, right? But if you kind of open that up and make yourself vulnerable and say, this is how it makes me feel as a person, and I just found so much value in modeling in ways that were safe and positive for kids, so that they felt like, oh, okay, I get that, or I could start to have treat each other a little differently, right? Because they have an example to work from.
Yes. Well, and kids are always watching us, right?
They're always watching us.
I mean, my goodness, kids would remember like, oh, you wore those shoes last week, and I'm like, I didn't even remember that I wore those shoes last week, but thanks for like keeping track of my shoes, right? They are always watching us. And so just thinking about, definitely, how are we modeling this? And they're watching us even when we don't know that they are, or we don't think that they are, right?
No, that is so true, and they don't miss a beat, and they'll go home and talk about it sometimes with their families. What else would you like what stands out to you tonight?
Oh, I don't know, Fred. So much of this is really great, and I think it really just speaks to honoring our students. Right?
Yeah, a lot of our kids don't all come with the technology backgrounds, so sometimes that's not an even playing field, whereas some of our students may not have adequate broadband at home, so they can't access. A lot of schools will have their curriculum online and not necessarily a book to take home or a textbook, right? So there's some inequities in how, are there multiple ways for kids to be able to learn rather than just being on a screen, right?
Yeah, and I'm a paper girl, and we've talked about this because I'm always like, can you print that for me? Can you print
that? I'm tired of all these digital
and
stuff.
people are like, well, all of a sudden our printing budget has gone up, and I'm like, that's probably me, because I have to print everything, because on a screen, I feel like I can't really interact with text. I try and I'll do my best, but honestly, when I have my papers. Like if to really truly engage, I feel like I need to have it in my hands. I need to touch it. I need to write on it. Typing doesn't do the same thing for me. So really honoring how our kiddos and our adults learn best, and yeah, I think that's never a bad thing.
Yeah, we could talk a little bit about the principle of representation, because when we think about how we represent curriculum to our students, some curriculum may not look like everyone in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to say on this, Fred. I don't even know where to start. So my son, so I'm Korean, and so my son is half Korean, and he came home one day and he said, Mom, did no Koreans did anything in America? And I said, what? And he's like, well, I only know of like 2 Korean, like, and I never see anyone except like there's only 2 Korean people that I know. And I was like, okay. And he's like, well, like BTS, which that's like a K-pop band, right? Well, that's not one person.
Oh, I've
right?
heard of them.
But he said, and the only person we ever talk about in like history is Kim Jong Un.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's North Korean.
North Korean.
And he's right, but he's
Right.
like, so I've never heard of any other Korean person. We've never talked about any other Korean person at school. And I was like, oh, I better beef up my home stuff here. But it shed some light. My son came home and was questioning, like, and I feel like we talked about everything, and he has a really great, like, highly, integrated life where we're trying to bring him all kinds of culture, and for him to come to me and say there's no Korean person ever done anything in America was like a real eye-opener, because if you think back, I think back to my school, and I think about how many teachers of color did I have? None. Not until I got into college. And then what Asian like people were there in history, right? And you've got what is that guy from Mongolia? Genghis Khan.
Oh, Genghis Khan.
So you got Genghis Khan.
Right.
And then I think we read The Good Earth, which was, man, they were really hard workers. But I mean, not the greatest picture of Asian culture, right? And so I do think we have to really look at, are we being inclusive, and what is being portrayed?
Right.
And how do kids see themselves and feel about themselves in what we're bringing to them? And if everything on our walls are white people, do they feel like that they belong there? If all of our curriculum is Eurocentric, do they feel like they have a place in America? And if we talk about all of the people that we've heard of, let's talk about Black or African American culture. We all know about slavery, right? But what else do we know about, segregation? I mean, these are not necessarily positive things, right?
No.
So thinking about what is it that we are bringing to our students that are bringing in diverse, not only diverse cultures, but diverse representations of the kids that we serve. Sorry for that.
No, that was perfect, because it's so important that students can identify if the curriculum doesn't support it, then it can be something that you can do in order to find visual representation and show it to your students, and have talks about art, different photographs, sculptures, things in nature, and just having those conversations about our indigenous folks, people here, and this land of ours was not our land in the beginning. And it's really there's a lot of things to consider when we think about our place, and we're kind of
and just I just sent out my newsletter.
Oh, good.
And so our San Joaquin County, we are on the land that was originally inhabited by the Miwoks, the Yokuts, and the communities of the Laitian.
Wow.
So and so very diverse, groups of people that lived here originally, and so how do we talk about that? How do we honor that? I mean, it's something that we need to be intentional about,
Mm-hmm.
and not just be. So I've heard some teachers have said, well, I changed the names in some of the word problems or some of the stories. And while I understand like the intention there that you're trying to maybe put more ethnic names in there, I think it is also important that we think about the situations that we are also depicting in some of
Right.
those. So do the names match, or are they parallel with the situations that they're in? Um, have you just changed the name willy nilly, or have you actually thought about the situation of that story or the context
Yeah.
so that it matches? Right?
Yeah, that's
That's a different
interest.
level.
That
Sorry,
that's
am I
different.
bringing in a
I
different
just,
level, Fred?
well, no, I just
We're
just
leveling
like
up here.
let's just
We're leveling up.
yeah, let's just put different categories of people into things, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't fit. It
Right.
doesn't really tell the right story, and
No.
really, it's an injustice
Right.
to put anyone's background or their culture or their traditions or anything into a box.
Yeah.
Nothing should be in a box
Yeah.
because it doesn't fit there. And I think we need to be really aware of that because it can be offensive.
Yes.
You know, for younger kids, maybe they wouldn't pick up on it, but still, it's not an example
Yeah.
that they would. We don't want them to carry that on. You know, as being well. You know, that's what Mr. Cochran taught us.
Right.
You know,
And
so.
while I get the intention is great, like we're like, oh, we're trying to get more representation, and my students are Latinx, and so we need to have more Latinx names so they have characters. But if what you're putting them in doesn't match their culture, I think that's doing a disservice. And so
Yeah.
so let's change the whole thing. Like, why do we have to use the same problem or the same story? Can we use something that's actually authentic to the culture?
Right. Well, you know, we're talking this conversation right now, talking about language for cultural competence. We're talking about shared language of cultural proficiency, routines that facilitate learner discourse and honoring language. And I think another thing about language that I think is important too is that even if students have roots from a certain country, the dialects could be different, and then
Right.
so there's cultural differences within countries, and the dialect there's all this just kind of brews up other things.
Yeah, I think that's like not making assumptions, right?
Right.
Like asking our kids,
Right.
what is appropriate or what is culturally relevant for you. I mean, if there's no, I don't know, I don't think that we should be afraid to learn from our kids
No.
or ask the questions.
Right.
I'd rather ask the question versus make the mistake and hurt someone, right?
Right,
And
right.
so, just that vulnerability also.
Yeah. So, in other words, just valuing each other's contributions, their traditions, and knowing that we each have our own. I don't know if your son ever came home, but mine has come home before and says, "Really, what is our culture, Dad? What do we do that makes us who we are?"
Yeah.
And I'll say, "Well, that's a good question. We don't have a traditional, um, attire or clothing,
Oh, yeah.
that is something that's a norm for us, except just what we've been
Yeah.
indoctrinated to,
Yeah.
to think that this is what you do as
Yeah. But I
aware.
think, that could be about learning. Maybe you want to go back and learn about your roots, right? You could do that.
Right, I could do that. And when my parents were alive, we really encouraged them to tell us a lot of stories
Yes.
because there were a lot of stories.
So
in my
much
family.
value in that too. And I just love that, the value of what our family and our ancestors can teach us, and what we can learn from them.
Yeah.
And we all have that, right?
Right.
We can all look at where we came from and recognize there's value.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in just our conversation today and just being very open without being scripted in any way, where we're very
Yeah.
unscripted, that's for sure.
No script here.
But I think as we have had these conversations, I'm looking at the UDL with equity in mind, and just looking at, we have addressed these. We haven't called them out exactly as well, action expression through power and voice. Well, we've had discussions about that, and there's so much more to learn.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so glad that we are friends and that
Yeah.
we can share our stories with each other, because I learned a lot from Lisa. Lisa learns from me, and and that's what really, I think, is the power of voice, is really is trying to, be a way to communicate, uh, and how to start conversations. Not that we know everything, we're not saying that. We just want to be able to start honest conversations about what's the best thing for kids, and how do all kids get access. How's that tier one instruction look in your classrooms, so that it isn't marginalized, it isn't some get this, some get that. Everybody has the same learning goals. The goals are rigorous, but to be met through flexible means. Doesn't mean it's watered down.
No.
It just means there's options, right? If we could just get started there, we'd be on the right place, because the first row of the guidelines is all about access. And if we can't have access, it's pretty hard to build and internalize with you don't have the access to begin with, right? Right. So that's kind of where we've learned a lot in our UDL presentations, in really looking at how do we communicate this graphic that is kind of daunting, really. We talk about the fact that, oh my gosh, there's so much verbiage in here. But as I start to understand it more, I start to see that there was just whoever sat down and wrote all of this, and it's gone through various versions over the
Several
40 years, right? And really just thinking about what forward thinking that was, because if you think about, I think it was the around the mid 80s when the guidelines were first introduced, and it was in consultation with Ron Mace about universal design in architecture, and really bringing that together, I think is just really helped me ground it, because if I can explain what universal design means to us in our everyday life, I have it's a little easier for me to explain it in and making that transfer into education. That's been kind of my goal in the last few years, is just to become a little more relevant and authentic. Because I think people want to, teachers and administrators, they want to see it as really being, it impacts you. It's emotionally impacts you as the right thing to do.
I agree. And the right thing to do for our kids, because they deserve it. Right. And they're worth it.
So Lisa, I think we've done I think this has been so much fun.
Okay. It was okay.
I think it was great. I think we appreciate the fact that we're able to share our voice with our learning community, and we realize that when we select a time to be available may not be the time for you to be available. So we are, of course, we share this recording with you. We hope you will give us some feedback on it. That would be really great. And I have put out a post that says that we're going to change our next session in December. It'd be from 4 to 4:30. We think a 30-minute window will probably work, and if it needs to go longer, it could go longer, definitely. But we're still.
But they don't have to hear me babble on for an hour.
You can come back. You can come back every month if you want to.
Like,
The Fred and Lisa.
Talking already.
The Fred and Lisa show. But anyway, you're getting real authentic stuff here. So that's the fun part about having a live stream on this, because it is more
authentic.
It is authentic.
Right.
So we are recruiting interest.
Yeah, we are. And, you know, I love how you're making it accessible in that we're doing it on Facebook, right? And we're also recording it.
We're recording
so others
it,
can, and then
right?
you're putting it on YouTube.
Sharing it on YouTube,
Right?
putting it on the Padlet, and it's
Yeah.
also shared under San Joaquin County Office of Ed's Facebook, not Facebook, YouTube subscription.
Wow.
So
We're gonna be
so
everywhere.
there's ways to
You're
to
like
do this.
bringing me into your like sphere of stardom.
Maybe. And the other thing we are going to do too is develop these into podcasts so that they can be shared out. So
Okay.
taking a vignette or something,
Yeah.
a little piece of it, and start to make them
Yeah. Then you
in
can
manageable chunks.
Then you can edit out my
Yeah,
long-winded kind
because
of thing.
55 minutes is an awfully long time to expect somebody to sit and listen to us,
I know.
right?
Well, we listen to each other for a really long
We-
time.
we-
but
we can
you
do
all
that.
probably don't.
We love to
listen
hear
as long.
ourselves talk.
That's right. And, you know, if you have specific questions or whatever, go ahead and put them in that chat. And, you know, we
Yeah.
will definitely take a look. And
Yeah.
if you want to know more or whatever, I'm sure there's contact information, Fred,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah,
and,
contact me and contact Lisa. That's absolutely fine.
or
and
just Fred, if he can
just
answer all
Fred.
your questions.
always happy to answer. Always there for
Yes,
you. So,
definitely. We're
and
here
that
to
was the
support you.
whole, and that was the idea behind the mini modules is to give little bite-sized chunks of UDL so that it isn't a sit and get, but it's kind of more of an experience,
Yeah.
and to be able to say, oh, I can take that bite and do something with that. I don't have to have all these. There's too many
Yeah.
facets, that I have to think about. So,
And can I just say one thing, Fred? Is I know we're going to go over, but I just wanted to say in this work, it is hard and it requires courage and to be brave. So you need to find a way to recenter yourself and find some comfort and find some peace and find your way to regroup. And I should have started with that because it's going to be, there are going to be challenges along the way. There are going to be obstacles, and you're going to encounter things maybe within yourself that maybe you didn't know were there. And so what is your way to like come back and regroup? I tell the story about after a difficult training, I called my husband and I said, I need to buy a couch. I don't want to hear anything about, what can we, I need to buy a couch. I need to bring back some power and control in my life, and so I'm going to buy a couch. So what is your buying a couch that's going to help you to regain some of that when you've had a hard day or when you've figured out some things that maybe are difficult to deal with? What do you
Sure.
what do you do to take care of yourself? And I
Yeah.
want to make sure that you are equipped with that first.
Yeah. There's so much power in different ways you can treat yourself. You can treat yourself materialistically. You can treat
Thanks, Fred.
yourself. That's what she's done. But there's other ways to treat yourself. And
Or just
treating,
connecting with
it's
a
just
colleague.
connecting. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel so much better today after
Me
this
too.
conversation.
I was a mess before we started, and now look at
Yeah,
this.
so that's what human connectedness is really all about. It's really coming together and sharing ideas and being accessible, right? So with that being said, I want to thank you so much. Thank you. Give me high fives. And thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful rest of your day, and look forward to hearing your comments. So good night, everyone.